Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And with your permission, I'd like to make the statement on the situation in Belarus. As the House will recall, on the 9th of August, Belarus held presidential elections which were neither free nor fair. The election campaign was itself characterised by the imprisonment of opposition candidates and the arrests of hundreds of their supporters. On polling day, on the 9th of August, witnesses reported extensive fraud and falsification of results. Local independent observers were barred from witnessing the count, including members of the British Embassy, who were threatened and then removed from the polling station. The Belarusian authorities prevented independent international monitoring of the electoral process by refusing to cooperate with the OSCE election monitors. And as a result, thousands of Belarusians took to the street in what can only be described as peaceful protest. They challenged Lukashenko's claim to have won 80% of the vote, and they demanded fresh elections. And they've been peacefully protesting in huge numbers right across Belarus ever since. The world has watched, frankly, in horror at the response of the Belarusian authorities. They launched a campaign of violence, intimidation and harassment against peaceful protesters. We've seen horrific scenes of militia attacking demonstrators and then dragging them away. UN human rights experts report that the authorities have beaten those that they held in detention, and they've threatened female protesters with violence, including rape. The Belarusian authorities have targeted journalists, including the BBC, and shut down the internet in order to hide their actions. Opposition leaders set up a coordination council to organise peaceful protests. In response, the authorities abducted, imprisoned and expelled all but one of the Coordination Council's board members. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has been exiled to Lithuania, and the prominent campaigner Maria Kolesnikova has been imprisoned and charged with destabilising the state. Only yesterday, Lukashenko was sworn in at a hastily organised and unannounced ceremony. And frankly, hiding his inauguration from the people of Belarus only serves to reinforce his wholesale lack of legitimacy. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK, the West and the world cannot just sit idly by while the Belarusian people's democratic and human rights are violated so brutally in clear violation of Belarus's responsibilities as a member of the OSCE. So for our part, the UK has worked with our key international partners, first to promote a peaceful resolution, but also to condemn the actions of the Belarusian authorities and to hold those responsible to account. I discussed the situation and our response with foreign ministers from France and Germany at Chevening on the 10th of September. I also discussed the issue and the situation with the Lithuanian foreign minister when he visited London last week. I've also just returned from Washington, where I agreed with Vice President Pence and Secretary of State Pompeo to coordinate the UK and the US response. The Minister for Europe has spoken to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and also Svetlana Alexievich. So now, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me be clear on the United Kingdom's position and our approach. First of all, we do not accept the results of this rigged election. Second, we condemn the thuggery deployed against the Belarusian people. We have led the way, working with 16 of our international partners, so that on the 17th of September we triggered the Moscow mechanism in the OSCE, which initiates a full and independent investigation into both the electoral fraud and the human rights abuses carried out by the Belarusian authorities. It is absolutely critical that those responsible are held to account. Madam Deputy Speaker, we are willing to join the EU in adopting targeted sanctions against those responsible for the violence, the repression and the vote rigging, although the EU process has now been delayed in Brussels. Given that delay, Madam Deputy Speaker, given Lukashenko's fraudulent inauguration, I have directed the SCDO sanction team to prepare Magnitsky sanctions for those responsible for the serious human rights violations. And we are coordinating with the United States and Canada to prepare appropriate listings as a matter of urgency. Next, Madam Deputy Speaker, we must support and strengthen civil society and the brave media outlets struggling to shine a light on the repression that we are seeing inflicted by the Belarusian authorities on its people. The government has already been working with our partners in Belarus to this effect, but we must do more. So I have doubled our financial support to human rights groups, independent media organisations and community groups, providing an extra £1.5 million over the next 2 years. That includes £800,000 of support for journalists in particular in Belarus. That UK funding will help train journalists, it will provide support to those who have been detained by the authorities, and also help replace equipment that's been destroyed or confiscated. We will apply all the tools at our disposal to hold Lukashenko and his regime to account, and we call on him to engage in serious and credible dialogue with the opposition, via mediation if necessary, in order to facilitate a peaceful outcome to the current crisis, and one which reflects and respects the will of the Belarusian people. Madam Deputy Speaker, if the authorities in Belarus fail to respond based on the outcome of the OEC investigation, which we have triggered, we will consider further actions with our international partners. Our vision for global Britain means standing up for democracy and human rights. That's what we're doing in Belarus, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa Nandy.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I start by thanking the Foreign Secretary for this statement and for advance sight of it. It is rare, but it matters when we agree with one another on all sides of the House. It sends a message to the people of Belarus that we stand with them, this whole House, for the right to choose their own destiny and to resist interference in their elections and in their freedoms from anywhere, wherever it comes from. And it's why we believe that he is right to focus support on the people of Belarus and focus on tackling the human rights abuses, the tear gas, the detention, the beatings that we've seen in recent weeks. I know he will also be as concerned as I am about reports of torture, and perhaps he'll take this opportunity today to reaffirm his government's commitment to upholding the Geneva Convention. I want to pay tribute in particular to those brave women who have stood up in recent days to the armed masked men and shown the face of courage to the world. When they defend democracy and stand up for freedom, they stand up for us all, and they must have our support. We very much support his efforts to work with allies to impose Magnitsky sanctions on those involved. Can he tell us whether he's had discussion with counterparts about including Lukashenko in these measures, and whether he has made any progress in ensuring that corruption is in the scope of the Magnitsky legislation that this House recently passed? Can I welcome the funding that he's provided to human rights organisations, but will he tell the House in particular what he's doing to protect academics? And is he exploring increasing the number of Chevening scholarships to Belarusians? Has he considered measures to support protesters who've lost their jobs or been blacklisted for the stance that they've taken? He will know from his previous work that there is more than one way to harass, intimidate and silence people into compliance, and losing your livelihood has always been one of the chief ways that dictatorships seek to silence people. I am particularly concerned about members of the arts and cultural community. More than 50 have been detained and a greater number have lost their livelihoods. What active steps is the British Embassy taking to protect writers and other cultural figures, as well as others involved in the protests, from interference? Madam Deputy Speaker, the BBC Russian service is a key source of impartial information for the people of Belarus. I'm very concerned both about the potential for funding cuts to the World Service and the targeting of its journalists. So will he commit to ensure the FCDO funding for this service is protected in any upcoming spending review? And will he tell us what his department is doing to support BBC journalists from attacks on them and their families? Has he had any discussions with the Home Secretary about provision for Belarusians seeking asylum in the UK? And will he take this opportunity to reiterate the UK's support for free and fair elections around the world? I welcome his announcement about the OSCE today. Will he commit to ensure that we play our part in continuing to provide funding to uphold democracy abroad and security at home? Madam Deputy Speaker, as he moves forward with sanctions, it underlines the importance of the UK safeguarding against the United Kingdom and our overseas territories, providing a safe haven for money obtained through corruption and human rights abuse, as he called it, blood money. So can I ask him what progress has been made in implementing the recommendations of the Russia report? The government has been silent on that matter since the report was published before the summer recess. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would say this, that one of the leading figures in the Belarusian Opposition Council said recently that more than the prospect of detention, what he fears is the prospect that nothing will change. We send a message from this House on all sides today that we stand with him and we stand with those who are defending freedom and democracy in Belarus and around the world.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for her statement, for her support, and I think it is powerful for all members across all political sides of the House to stand in solidarity with the people of Belarus, and I welcome that support. Like the Shadow Foreign Secretary, I'm appalled at the arbitrary detention and the abuse of protesters in detention, including any activity that amounts to torture or inhumane and degrading treatment. And we absolutely stand for the absolute prohibition against torture as reflected in various human rights treaties to which we are a party. In relation, the Honourable Lady referred to sanctions. We are considering the whole range of potential individuals. She mentioned also corruption. She'll know that corruption is not currently covered by the Magnitsky sanctions. They deal with a slew of the most serious human rights violations, although they do cover those who might profit from those human rights abuses. But I can tell her that I'm looking very carefully at how we extend the next step of the Magnitsky sanctions to corruption and similar types of offences. I'll say more about that in due course. In terms of money for civil society, including journalists, as I explained, we've doubled that amount of money, and we'll look very carefully at how it's targeted, not just to journalists, but also writers and members of the arts that she described. I won't preempt the CSR, notwithstanding her deft attempt to, but what I can tell her on media freedom is that we have this campaign that we do side by side with Canadians, which is encouraging those countries that are willing to sign up to new legislation, but also to provide support to journalists who are either in detention or have litigation against them. Well, that is progressing. We work very hard with the Canadians on it, and the numbers joining that media freedom campaign have grown. Finally, she asked about the OSCE. I can tell her that obviously we work very carefully with our partners in the OSCE. It was the United Kingdom that pushed for the Moscow mechanism to get an international review both into the human rights abuses and the vote rigging, and we're proud of the role we play with our partners.
Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a great pleasure to hear the statement from my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, who I think has laid out an impressive and decent and strong series of proposals, and very pleasing to hear the opposition agree as well. May I ask, though, building on the discussions that he's so clearly had with various of our allies, what conversations has he had with Germany? And the reason I raise Germany in particular is because the Nord Stream 2 project that is currently going through is allowing the Russian government to salami slice our eastern neighbours and friends one by one. And what we're seeing in Belarus could easily happen in others. Now, although Belarus is the last country in the world still to have an active KGB, we hope that it won't become the first of many to have an active SVR base very soon.
Can I thank my honourable friend and pay tribute to him and the work of his committee? I had a detailed discussion on this with Heiko Maas, my German opposite number, at Chevening, along with Jean-Yves Le Drian, my French opposite number. We've made clear, as he will know, that we have our reservations and our concerns about Nord Stream 2, both from the point of view of encouraging European energy dependence on Russia, but also the impact on Ukraine. Equally, I think it's quite important that given the lead Germany has taken with Alexei Navalny and in relation to the work we're doing together on Belarus, that we maintain European solidarity. But those points are well made, and of course our European partners know the UK position.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also would thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of the statement, and I'm pleased to commend him on the tone and the content of it. I think it's important that we in this House are not ashamed to say that we stand united with the brave protesters in Belarus. Having said that, there's a number of measures in here that I called for myself in the last FCDO questions, so it would be churlish not to support them now, and I'm glad to see that progress. So I'd make only a couple of concrete points in relation to the statement. At FCDO questions last, Minister Morton undertook to meet the Belarusian diaspora here in London. I'm conscious that meeting hasn't happened yet because of diary pressures, but could I urge that that meeting be expedited? There's a lot of good ideas in there. I warmly support the triggering of the Moscow mechanism in the OSCE, but could the Foreign Secretary give us some indication of the timescale of that investigation? Because there will be pressures for this to be a long grass exercise, where I think this is rather more urgent and a quite straightforward investigation in practice. On the Magnitsky sanctions, I'm very pleased to see the action in conjunction with the US and others, but does the Foreign Secretary share my disappointment at the lack of unanimity in the EU because of the Cypriot government's position, and could he express that disappointment and urge his counterparts in Cyprus to change their view? A concerted effort is needed to support the Belarusian activists in this. This is a nuanced approach, and the Foreign Secretary can rest assured of my party's support for this approach going forward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the honourable gentleman, welcome both substance of what he said, but also the spirit of solidarity, which we now have unbroken across this House. He asked about our reaching out to members of the Belarusian opposition, but also civil society. He's right, of course, COVID has restrained that a little bit, although I would say that the Minister for Europe has spoken to two of the leading opposition figures, and therefore we do provide that support in principle, but also in practice. I mean, he quite rightly asked about the question of the time frame for the OEC investigation. It will want to proceed as expeditiously as possible. We want that conclusion. I think it is quite important for the international community as a whole to be able to support action, to see an independent international investigation under the auspices of the very well-regarded and respected OSCE. At the same time, I want to give them the time and space to do the job properly, because the credibility also rests on that. So I don't have a specific deadline that they've been set, but he makes a sensible point about time. I share his concern about the lack of a common position in the EU. We hope that they will arrive at that. We certainly encouraged it. We've been on the ambitious end within those discussions. But of course, one of the advantages that we've got as we leave, and with the Magnitsky sanctions in place, is that we're not limited or fettered by that, which is why at the same time actually is welcoming and working with our European partners, we're in a position with our American and Canadian friends to proceed with the Magnitsky sanctions, which we will do as soon as possible.
Miller.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for today's announcement, which will be huge comfort to many people in Belarus, because putting Magnitsky sanctions in place against those who are propping up this illegitimate regime in Belarus is also sending a very strong signal about the view we take on the horrific scale of abuses that people in Belarus are having to endure, including 7 murders. Will my right honourable friend meet with me and some of those who over the last decade have worked tirelessly to keep alive the importance of free speech, democracy and human rights on the ground in Belarus, regardless of the threats to their own lives, so that we can understand better how our country can play its role fully in supporting the people of Belarus to move forward peacefully to a true democracy in the future?
Can I thank my right honourable friend and pay tribute to the work that she's done, both as a backbench MP but also as a select committee chair in all of this area, in particular on human rights and equality. We will certainly make sure. I'm very happy to see her personally. I'm travelling shortly, so if she wishes to have that meeting before then, the Europe Minister will happily meet with her. But I absolutely share the importance, the emphasis on human rights, and also more broadly standing up for civil society, given the pressures and the attack that they are undergoing right now in Belarus, and that's why we've provided that additional £1.5 million to support them at this time.
Steve McCabe.
Thank you. Dreadful though this situation is, many commentators have suggested that it shouldn't be viewed as a classic East-West conflict, and that Lukashenko is no more a friend of Moscow than he is of his own people. Does the Foreign Secretary agree, and does he plan any further activity on the possibility of a mediated solution?
Foreign Secretary.
And I thank the honourable gentleman, and I think he's right to call for mediation. At the moment, it feels like there is little movement in that direction. We support it. I know that the Germans and others within the EU have been reaching out on all sides. I would just say this. given the nature and the character of the regime in Belarus, given the support it is receiving from Moscow, notwithstanding the points he has made, I think to give it its best chance, we must put the pressure on, and we must hold those to account. Those two things do not run in tandem. Actually, I think they reinforce each other.
We now go to Dame Cheryl Gillan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement today? The Committee of Political Affairs and Democracy in the Council of Europe that I chair is currently producing two urgent reports, one on the political reform in Belarus and one by our own Lord David Blencathra on the urgent need for electoral reform in Belarus. And the Standing Committee of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has also called on Belarus to launch a democratic, broad-based and inclusive national political process as a first step towards a peaceful way out of the current crisis, and in particular to open the door for those reforms, starting with the constitution and the election process. Now, the Assembly of the Council of Europe is ready to support this process in close cooperation with the Venice Commission, who have written many opinions on Belarus. I wondered what support and encouragement the Foreign Secretary could give to this process, alongside coordinating the USA-UK response and the OSCE response.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend and pay tribute to the work that she does and all members across the House in the Council of Europe. It's an important institution. It doesn't get the same sort of media or public attention that the EU does, but it does incredibly important work, particularly in this field. I will give my full support to the efforts that she is making and the Council of Europe is making. And I think that what we are doing, particularly with the OSCE investigation of both the vote rigging and the human rights abuses, will provide not just moral support, but actually practical support in terms of the findings in moving the important work that she's taking forward and making progress in that respect as well.
Jim Shannon.
Can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement, and I'm greatly encouraged, indeed this House should be greatly encouraged by the fact that we have a Secretary of State who leads from the front. Will the Secretary of State further outline whether reports of women and children being beaten by official police and having their passports removed have been verified by the FCDO officials in place in Belarus? And further, what steps can be taken to stand alongside those who are having their most basic human rights discarded in the most horrific scenes we have watched on TV?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman and say that we are, as he is, shocked by what we've seen, the violence, the severity of it, and frankly, the brazenness of it in front of the media. The reports that we've seen are as bad as the ones that he suggested. I think what we do right now is the dual effort of trying to reach out and support those who find themselves under attack, in particular the journalists and the media who are trying to shine a light on this horrific abuse. But ultimately, what we can do with our partners, our European partners, our American and Canadian partners, and indeed others, is hold those to account who commit these appalling abuses of human rights.
Wakeford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I thank the Secretary of State for making this statement. There is little doubt that the elections in Belarus were neither fair nor free. The response of the authorities following this has been absolutely abhorrent, with threats of torture and rape and the military even being on the streets. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the UK does not and will not accept the results of this election, and we will consider the most appropriate sanctions against Lukashenko and his regime?
Yeah. Can I thank my honourable friend? That's exactly what we'll do. We want to get to the bottom of it, which is why we've triggered the OSCE Moscow mechanism. We want to hold those to account, which is why we will at speed look at the Magnitsky sanctions as well as supporting the EU track. And we need to make sure that we can continue to shine a light on the abuses, which is why we're supporting journalists doing their job.
We now go to Peter Grant. Apparently Peter Grant has withdrawn. So we now go to Raymond Chisty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the statement by the Foreign Secretary, and also his commitment on human rights is nothing new. I remember when we both came to the House and sat on the Joint Committee of Human Rights. He's a champion on these matters across the board. The Foreign Secretary will know my question because of my interest, which is what I worked with him on religious freedom. Freedom of religion or belief is a basic fundamental right and is crucial for peaceful, prosperous and a virtuous society. and also it's a national security imperative. One of the last things I did as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy was as a member of the International Religious Freedom Alliance, which I was very honoured to vice-chair. And in that last meeting, the International Religious Freedom Alliance raised the case of Archbishop Kondrovich, who was not being allowed to enter Belarus, his own country. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary to do everything we can to ensure that individuals like Archbishop Kondrovich are able to enter that country and individuals are able to practice their faith openly and freely? Finally, can I just personally thank him for the support he gave me as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy in the task that I did for the Prime Minister? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Can I just pay tribute from the Joint Committee of Human Rights through to the Special Envoy role on the stalwart work he's done as a champion for human rights and freedom of religious belief. He will know that I view the three things, media freedom, Magnitsky sanctions, freedom of religious belief, are inextricably entwined. Of course, we will look at the case that he describes and make sure that those voices for freedom are not snuffed out in Belarus.
We now go to Barry Shearman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. Can I push the Secretary of State a little harder? He wants to get to the bottom of all this, he said. But at the bottom of all this, surely we know it's Russia. Russia becoming almost a rogue state round the world. And isn't it a fact that it's Russia that Russia only listens when you're tough with them? Can't we have sanctions against Russia in this country? Clear out the nest of vipers that have taken up residence, Putin supporters and yes men and yes women here in London. For goodness sake, cannot we take on Russia and show Russia we mean business and start perhaps with the owner of the Evening Standard?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I say to the honourable gentleman, I admire his passion for justice and human rights. I'm not sure, in fact, that the relationship between Lukashenko and President Putin is quite the way he described. I think there is more nuance there. But of course, one of the challenges we've got is, as we hold Lukashenko to account, is trying to avoid the inevitability of Belarus slipping further and further into Moscow's embrace. In terms of the action we're taking here in the UK, we have one of the most rigorous systems in the world to make sure, as I've described it before, dirty money, blood money does not find its way washing through UK businesses or banks, and we're going to strengthen that even further in the way I described by proceeding to add and extend Magnitsky sanctions to the corruption field as well.
Number 12 withdrawn, so we go to Layla Moran.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to start by thanking the Foreign Secretary for his statement, the substance of it, and to add the voice of the Liberal Democrats to the solidarity shown across this House. It's so important that we stand together in our fight for democracy and against those who want to undermine human rights. I'm glad also that the Foreign Secretary is now flexing his muscles when it comes to Magnitsky sanctions. It shows what can be done. And could I press him to continue to flex those muscles in other parts of the world so that global Britain is consistent in its approach, and in particular against those who undermine human rights abuses for the Uyghurs in Xinjiang?
Can I thank the honourable lady and say we welcome the Liberal Democrat support for these measures. We, of course, want to apply the Magnitsky sanctions as effectively as possible. I think part of that also is making sure you've got clear evidence to do so. The one thing we want to avoid is the kind of legal challenge which give the very perpetrators of human rights abuse a political propaganda gift. But of course, as I've said before, both in relation to Xinjiang and also Hong Kong, we are assimilating, collating and coordinating with our international partners and allies to make sure we've got the clearest understanding of those abuses that are taking place.
Anthony Higginbotham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement today. I think it sends a very clear message about the values we have as a country and the way we will defend them abroad. It was particularly concerning to hear that UK embassy staff and other independent monitors were unable to go about their role. And the worry is that the coronavirus pandemic gives a veil for autocratic leaders across the world to shy away in a veil of public health protection. So could he reassure me in the House that everything is being done to make sure our staff and other independent observers can go about their work unhindered, whatever the circumstances?
Can I thank my honourable friend? He's right, and not just in relation to the UK monitors, but indeed to the OSCE election monitors. And I think it's important that the light that we're shining on Belarus via the OSCE is there, because it provides an independent, very credible basis on which to make exactly the points that he's raised.
Mary Kelly-Foy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since 2010, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office has seen resources dedicated to human rights cut, due in no small part to this government's short-sighted austerity programme. Whilst I welcome the announcement today to restore a small part of that funding, does the Foreign Secretary agree that the events in Belarus demonstrate that this approach has been indeed a failure?
Foreign Secretary.
No.
Matt Vickers.
Free speech and a free press have a vital role to play in any functioning democracy. I'm sure the whole House shares the deep concern at the way journalists in Belarus have been targeted by the Belarusian regime. What steps will he now take to support the brave media outlets that are daring to hold Lukashenko to account?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, as I've set out in my statement, I can say to my honourable friend that we do want to provide support, not just for the journalists, but to civil society. They're always, the journalists tend to be the first ones that despotic and authoritarian regimes go for, and there's no secret as to why. It's because they're the ones that shine a light on the abuses and give the truth to the people, but also to the outside world. So it's quite right that we extend the money, the support we provide for journalists and for civil society, particularly as Belarus goes through this tumultuous period where freedom, liberty and human rights come under such dire threat.
We now go to Geraint Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a member serving on the Council of Europe, I wholly support the condemnation of the abuse of democracy and human rights in Belarus. But can I ask the Foreign Secretary how he can be expected to be taken completely seriously in condemning Belarus for breaking international law when it is his government that intends to break international law in its trade negotiations?
Can I reassure him that in all the discussions I've had, he's the only one that's made that point?
Sarah Brickcliffe.
Speaker, we must stand together with our international partners against the thuggery and the election rigging, and the EU's sanctions will be a crucial tool in holding Lukashenko and his regime to account. So can my right honourable friend confirm that we'll remain involved in those even after the end of the transition period?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I reassure honourable friend that if the EU adopts sanctions, and we hope they will, and we hope they'll be ambitious, we would continue them. Obviously, we'd work out how they coincided with the Magnitsky sanctions and the timing of that, but we would continue them after the transition period. I can give her that reassurance.
David Linden.
Deputy Speaker, and the right honourable gentleman's right to make the case for people in Belarus and find cross-party support on all sides down that, but the Shadow Foreign Secretary was right to talk about the impact on workers. Can I press the Foreign Secretary specifically on what action the government is taking through financial support with, for example, the International Labour Organisation to make sure that workers are not being disadvantaged as a result of standing up for basic freedoms of human rights and democracy?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman? I'm not quite sure what action he would propose. We can certainly talk to our partners, including in the ILO. But the truth is, the fact is, having rigged an election to stay in power and exerting all the authoritarian might of the Belarusian state against the people, it's precisely because they've done that that we can't, in all honesty, provide the kind of support we would want to the workers who, of course, will be, amongst others, the ones to suffer as a result of this. What we can do is put the pressure on, try to support the media institutions, try to support and press for a path towards a peaceful resolution in order that Belarusians can elect their own leaders who can provide the economic support to the workers of that country.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for his statement? The situation in Belarus has an impact on neighbouring countries like Lithuania, where Svetlana Tikhanovskaya has fled to. What support will we be giving our NATO allies in the region? And will we be recognising the leadership of Mrs. Tikhanovskaya, who claimed to have won 60-70% of the vote in the places where they were properly counted?
Can I thank my honourable friend? We've made clear that we do not accept the illegitimate election that took place. We will watch very carefully. The United Kingdom, the consistent practice of the UK has been to recognise states rather than governments. But we have been very clear that this is an illegitimate election and cannot produce a legitimate result. On the point about the Baltics, they are our friends, they are our NATO allies. I saw the Lithuanian Foreign Minister recently, and we'll be working very closely with them because not only do we share the same values, but they will feel under threat as close neighbours to Belarus and indeed to Russia, and they need our support now, and they need stalwart support from the United Kingdom.
Rachel Watkins.
Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to hear the Secretary of State talk how we must support and strengthen civil society. And many trade unionists in Belarus have been arrested. So could he tell me what conversations he has had with the ETUC and trade unions to support the role trade unions play in civil society in Belarus?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady? I think it's true to say, particularly in Europe and Eastern and Central Europe, that the trade union movement, I think of Czechoslovakia in particular, which is where my father came from, has been very closely aligned with the human rights movement and the cause of liberty for many, many years, including under the Soviet Union. So I join with, I share the spirit of solidarity with those unions who are feeling imperiled at this time, and we certainly stand with them as we do with the journalists for the basic principles of freedom and liberty that unite us all.
Rob Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've already heard today of the Belarusian authorities' appalling treatment of journalists, and I welcome my right honourable friend's condemnation of that behaviour and financial support for those who are trying to shine a light on the disgraceful events in Belarus. Does he share my concern about censorship in Belarus, given that the Committee to Protect Journalists reports that mobile internet services have been deliberately disrupted and that independent news websites have been blocked? And does he further agree with me that there must be free and unfettered access to news and information in Belarus?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Of course, the first liberty that any despot or dictator goes for is freedom of speech and freedom of expression, because they are the liberties that guard all of the others. They're the ones that shine light on all the other mispractices that take place. So we absolutely stand with the people of Belarus for the freedom of expression and against any attacks on journalists, on the media, or indeed on social media, including the internet.
We now go to Fergal Clark.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the wake of the Belarusian election, NGOs have expressed serious concerns that the UK is considering reducing funding for international election monitoring. Will the Secretary of State assure the House that this is not the case and that this government recognises the important role that upholding free and fair elections around the world has in protecting our own national security here in the UK?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady? I haven't heard that criticism. It's certainly not one that's been directed at me, but I can reassure her, and I hope I have, through the statement today, that we stand full square behind the support for civil society, election monitoring, journalists in Belarus and beyond.
And for withdrawn, so Margaret Ferrier.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we all rightly condemn the actions of the Belarusian authorities. Threats of Russian interference in the situation have been a constant feature of the Belarusian protests. On the 27th of August, Vladimir Putin stated that he has formed a police reserve to use in Belarus if the situation gets out of control. What representations has the government made to the government of the Russian Federation to demand that the sovereignty of the Republic of Belarus remains intact, regardless of further developments?
Can I thank the Honourable Lady? I think she's absolutely right to worry about the predatory approach of Russia, which has always regarded Belarus as a client state. We're watching that very carefully along with our international partners, and that is also one of the reasons that we're taking the measures that I've set out today.
Thank you.